Argh, not another podcast about book publishing, hosted by William May, in which the author finds himself embroiled in a podcast about book publishing.
Hey everyone, this is Denise, and I've got Meggie and William here on the line. Say hi, guys.
Hey there.
Hi. So, what happened was we were having our weekly meetings. We have, in case anyone's interested, every Tuesday we speak at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. And we have these wonderful discussions. Like, seriously, they go all over the place. And we get very excited and we talk about poetry and we talk about humanity and we talk politics. We talk about all kinds of things. And the fact that...
We try to get some work done as well.
Yeah, but we do. But the fun part is Maggie's in
Portugal,
William's in Florida, and I'm in New York City. And so we all have news and things happening to us at different times. And so we share the news, and then we also share, obviously, the object of desire when it comes to William May and his writing, which is poetry. And we started talking, I think, was it 2 weeks ago? Or last week? The week before?
About 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. And we sort of just talked about poetry, like how much we love poetry and what poetry means to all of us, you know, like how it relates to our lives. You know, Meggie, as you all probably know, is a writer as well as William, and William has studied poetry beyond. I don't think I've ever met anyone who has had so much, you know, experience learning and understanding and working with other poets. And, you know, I have to say, William's a guru on poetry. That's what I'd say.
I don't know. I don't endorse that statement necessarily, but I appreciate it.
So what we decided to do is we decided that we would record, each of us would pick 3 poems that we really liked or that we felt we could relate to, and then read them aloud on the next podcast, which is happening as we speak. And then we would discuss it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to each read our poetry, you know, one at a time, like a round robin. And then the discussion will either come after the poetry, probably right after we each read it, because we're gonna take this off the cuff. And then we can discuss, you know, what it means or what we think it means or what it says it means. Because a lot of these poems are, William, tell them what the criteria was.
Well, I mean, we sort of picked poems in English for the moment because, I mean, to explain why I wanted to do it in English is just because translation, I have a friend who used to say that a translation is the most important piece of garbage you'll ever own, because no translation can ever really capture the original work. So when you're talking about work that's very much about the language, which poetry is generally, it's very hard to find a translation that doesn't in some way get between you and the writing. And while I do value translation, I think that it was good for us, if we're going to start doing something like this, to start out with poems that are unobscured, if that makes any sense.
And then remember about the time when. Yeah,
we wanted to pick poems by poets who, not contemporary poetry. We wanted like more poetry. I think we said like 1950s-ish was sort of like poets whose careers were rooted before that. And the main reason for that is, personally, first of all, like, I wanted to sort of focus more on poetry that's a little earlier than my own era than right now, because I think poetry is always a moving target. Stanley Kunitz, who when I met him and saw him reading and stuff, he was already in his 90s. And he used to say that, like, you know, when he was younger, there were a lot of poets that he would read who were being anthologized and discussed all over. And now no one remembers them. They're not considered important poets anymore. Oh, wow. And that's because, you know, poetry is always changing and moving, and you don't, you know, there's a degree to which it's very easy to mistake something in the moment for, you know, having a more lasting value. And I think it's worth, in this, looking at poems that have stood the test of time for the moment.
And I think there's two things I want to say that you made me think of. One is it not true that there's a certain, in our culture, at least in American culture, new is better, new is fresh, young is good, young is better, like in the music business and in, with movies, new, or even in clothing and furniture, get new. So there's,
I think, in some ways we're getting into, part of this is what I feel like we're getting into sort of the speed of progress in our culture, in our society. That's a large part of what you're talking about.
Jackie, didn't you say something like you felt like poetry shifted when televisions came into being? What did you say?
Actually,
it was about music. It was something about music.
Right, recorded music.
A lot of people talk about this with the visual arts. When you talk about visual art, there are people who will talk about how up until the invention of the camera, visual art was the only way to create a record of the image, of if you wanted a picture of what someone looked like, you went to a painter.
Got it.
Mm.
And so the invention of the camera liberated artists from a certain necessity to record reality. They were now able to move away from representation to a greater extent. And this is seen as one of the precursors to modern art, to the movement of art away from more representational forms.
Right.
In a similar way, poetry was always very musical. And I think a large part of this is because you could not have recorded music. So if I wanted a piece of music to take with me, either I needed to be able to create the music myself by having an instrument and playing, which is something that definitely existed to a greater degree in past eras. I mean, the idea of families sitting around in their living room playing music together on a Thursday evening was a common kind of idea.
I mean, that still happens. It still happens. I know musicians.
But not in this, but I'm not talking about I'm talking about just as a general thing.
That was there was no television. There was no radio yet.
Right.
I get it.
And the thing is, if you were traveling though, if you were a person, how do you have a piece of music you can carry around with you? Well, the closest thing is poetry.
Oh, I see where you're going.
So you read a poem and it has that kind of musical element to it. It has a rhythmic and a device that in some way satisfies that desire for music.
And the percussion, the rhythms, the flow, the bounce. Cool. I'm going to also mention what I actually remembered. I think I remembered exactly when we started talking about reciting our own poems is when I think we were having a discussion. And I think, William, you rattled off a Frost poem.
Yeah.
And then we were like, and personally, I happen to be someone who likes to hear William read poetry. I'm a big fan. And so that's how it all started. Because then Meggie, she's like, I love this poem. And then, then I'm like, well, I was just reading William Shakespeare the other night, which was true. So it kind of organically happened. But I want to share what I just found. On April 9, 1860, Scott recorded a snippet of the French folk song Claire De La Lune. Claire De La Lune.
Yeah.
That was the first recorded sound, apparently. That's what they're saying. This
is a revolutionary thing that they've discovered in the last few years. That.
Well, I'm going to send this link because Meggie, it's a great.
What I think it is.
Yeah, it's August 9th, and it says would this must fall sometime between the early experiments and the recognizable Claire de Lune. Claire de Lune was about a bird, because Lune, for some reason, I don't know why. So the light of the moon. That was the first song ever.
Yeah.
It's what I'm talking about is the sort of commercialization of recording, not just the existence of it as an idea, but if you look at Edison and the phonograph, which was really when recording became a popularly available technology, it's a little bit later than that.
I'd like to hear what it sounds like if I can find it. Maybe we can play it in the, what do you call it?
I can maybe try to find something that it doesn't have copyrights, of course, because this is important. But
I mean, it may be that original recording, but as I recall, it's not like it's a really clear recording or anything. It's more of a historical artifact than a concert piece.
It is
it's a lullaby.
It is considered. I'm sorry. It's a lullaby. Yeah, for kids. Yeah.
Very cool. This is what I love about our conversations. I always learn so much. So who wants to read first?
I mean, I can. I mean, I have an Emily Dickinson poem. I can read it to you now and see what you think.
Yes.
Perfect. Let's get started.
Okay.
I heard a fly buzz, which is poem 465 from Emily Dickinson. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air. Between the heaves of storm, the eyes around had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering firm for the last onset when the king be witnessed in the room. I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portions of me be assignable, and then it was there, interposed, a fly, with blue, uncertain stumbling buzz between the light and me. And then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see.
So,
I mean, so it's a question of whether you want me to read that one or the Frost. I put a link to it in the document, I think.
I love hearing it, but in order to kind of interpret and give some thoughts, I need to see it in front of my eyes.
So I think many times writers use this kind of metaphor of the fly because this reminded me of my favorite author. His name is Grigorij Gospodinov. He won the Booker Prize last year, and he actually wrote a whole book from the perspective of a fly.
There's definitely in chaos. Many things are happening in the world right now, and we're talking about flies. That's what I like. Everything matters. Every little thing matters. So what's next up? I'm thinking, do you want me to read my poem next?
Sure.
Or do you?
Yes.
Which poem do you want to read first?
Sure. I was going to do, well, I'll tell you the poem that really blew me away. I stumbled upon her.
Gwendolyn Brooks.
Mm-hmm. And this poem just hit me because, again, it's very musical for me. And it's also says so much in so little. So I'll read that first. She was born 1917, was Gwendolyn Brooks. And she passed away at the millennium, 2000. So she had a long life. And she was in, from the 1900s, and she just hit the 2000. We real cool. The pool players 7 at the golden shovel. We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We fit in. We jack June. We die soon.
It's interesting that in both poems we're talking about death.
What?
So the poem about Emily Dickinson starts, I heard a fly buzz when I died. And then yours starts, like it's actually ending with, we die soon. So I just find that very beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful. I actually, especially if you think about Shakespeare, and I looked at a lot of sonnets because I'm going to read numbers 33, but it's interesting because death is definitely prevalent. Back then, I think there was a lot more focus on death. Like, especially, maybe people were dying a lot younger too. Okay, so you're up, Meg.
One thing I want to bring up in relation to the Golden Shovel, though, is that there's actually a poetic form that's Terence Hayes, who's a contemporary poet, created a form sort of honoring Gwendolyn Brooks' this poem that's become known as a golden shovel, where you take a line, usually from Gwendolyn Brooks, and from most, like, Terence Hayes started with a line from this poem and wrote a new poem.
Oh, wow. So in other words, you take a line of hers?
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the traditional idea. I think that there are poets who do it with other poetry.
So she was that powerful and she was that prominent. I had no idea.
This is a very, very significant poem.
I was sort of attracted to it, I think, because I've been reading so much of William's work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I love real cool,
Yes, you said it sounded very kind of melodic to you, that it had a rhythm. So
I can see Louis Armstrong.
I think that on the Poetry Foundation website,
Yeah.
they have a Gwendolyn Brooks reading it.
No way.
Here, you want to hear it?
Yeah.
And last is We Real Cool. The pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon.
Interesting. Yeah, it was. I think I read it kind of like with the similar meter. But
You did, yeah. You read it very similarly.
Interesting.
It's because it's written to be read that way.
Yeah, it's funny. Her wheeze get quieter and quieter.
yeah,
Is it-
yeah, it's almost like an echo in the end, like we.
Yeah, it's
And it's almost, she doesn't say we. It's like, wah. It's interesting. Very cool. Alrighty. So Maggie, you're up.
So I chose Frost, The Road Not Taken, because I know about him, but I didn't know much about his work. So I was like, okay, let me check more. Because when William recited part of his poem, I was like, let me check some other poems of his and let me see if something resonates with me. And this one really resonated because I feel like maybe the three of us are the kind of people who would go mostly to the road less taken. I wouldn't say the road not taken, but I would say we tend to think a little bit differently. And I definitely, many times in my life, I don't live in my own country. So let's say for many people in my country, I took the road not taken because I live in another country. So for that reason, I chose that poem. And it goes like this.
2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though, as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
It's a great poem. So I understand you're talking about people, or he's talking about decision, and decisions can sometimes take time. And so take time with it.
Also, if we're going to talk about what this poem is about, there's a turn, a very sharp turn in this poem that most people don't notice, which is that he basically says, when he says at the end, is more or less a lie.
Here, I shall be telling. Yeah.
Because he says both roads were equally traveled.
But that's not the case.
Wait, he says, took the other as just as fair and have, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though, as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. It's not less traveled. He's just calling it less traveled at the end because he's trying to make himself sound special.
Wait, what I just heard, what you read, I'm reading like that for some reason the path was equally dented. In other words,
right, yet the same number of people have walked on both roads that are worn the same.
It might not be the case because it could be more people on one path, but it could be
but he doesn't know that.
different people walk differently.
Denise,
maybe
that's true, but he doesn't know that. The point is, he has no idea whether the road he took is the less traveled one.
But why? So why are you saying he's lying? Maybe he's just
At
making
the end, he's lying. When he says, oh, I took the less traveled path. He doesn't know if that's even true.
Oh, in his mind, he took the less traveled
Well, no,
path.
he's just saying, this is what I'm going to tell people.
Because he wants, like you said, he wants to be special.
So when I read this poem, that's what I get a lot of the time is this, and it's a very misunderstood poem, I think, because of that.
Okay.
But I mean, so like when I read it, I'm like, okay, the first 3 stanzas are setting up this idea that like this guy's in the woods and he has to choose which way to go. And there's really no reason to choose one path over the other. They're both nice paths. So he's like, okay, I'll take this one. And maybe one day I'll come back and take the other one. Probably not, though. And then he's like, so years from now, when I tell this story, I'm going to say, I took the less traveled path, and that's why I'm special.
That's interesting because I was just thinking about this, and hear me out. This is bizarre, but this is where my brain is going right now. I think sometimes there's a lot of young people, sadly, a lot of young men doing some very violent things and some very, like, unfortunately, a lot of the criminal things and the shootings and stuff.
Sure.
You know,
That
it's
means
young.
to blow up Taylor Swift concerts.
Exactly. That's exactly where I'm going. Do these young men do these things to stand out? Because they don't maybe think of themselves as special in other ways?
I think some of them do.
Yeah, that's what I think. It's interesting. And I never looked at this poem as a person trying to put more importance on themselves than possibly he was. I mean, and that's another thing, you know, that you could look at what goes on in our world today, how someone can blow up themselves as far as how their importance. I'm not going to say any names. They say they're important, but they're not really that important. Because when you're important, perhaps you're a bit more humble about it.
Then why he says, oh, I kept the first for another day. So this is, you say that on the third stanza, he basically changes the perspective because he says, and both the morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads onto the way. What does that mean?
Do you understand what that line means? Okay, so
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, one step comes after another. So you start walking and now you're somewhere else. And so you keep walking and you wind up so way leads upon to way. So one place leads you to go to another place.
Okay.
So he doesn't come back because by the time he gets done walking the path, he's somewhere else and he's walking and now there's another path in front of him.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
What year was this written? Do we know, Meggie? William?
I can find out. It was first published in 1915.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So 2 years before Gwendolyn Brooks was born. She was born in 1917. It's random because maybe that's where his mind was going at the time. And also, there was less going on in the world. You know what I'm saying? There was less to do, less entertainment to do. So maybe sometimes people entertain themselves more within their own mind and their, in their imagination. All right. So we're back to your next poem is up.
Okay. So I'm going to read, I think I'll read the Robert Hayden poem, Those Winter Sundays, next.
Okay.
Those winter Sundays. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold, then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's really something.
Yeah, I love this poem. It's.
I didn't read it. I'm just first. I'm just I
Sure.
kind of just, I just wanted to hear them because I like
That's
audio.
fine.
Cool. It was lovely.
So why did you choose that poem?
Yeah. Good question.
For me, I mean, first of all, this is just an exceptional poem. It's such a beautiful poem. And first of all, I think part of it, it's a poem that has changed for me as I've gotten older. You know, my father passed away a few years ago. And the first times that I read this poem, the first time I remember reading this poem was when I was in college, reading it when I was a freshman in a poetry workshop. And it was a beautiful poem, but like, it means something different to me now as a person with, you know, a different experience in the world. I think I understand it very differently. I mean, it's a poem that I think about a lot, to be honest.
It almost, I know this sounds weird if I say this, it's almost like the perfect poem in a way. It has all these different qualities to it that makes you think it's covering so many aspects of poetry. This is just someone, again, who's coming new into poetry as far as this intensely. You know, I've always had it in my life, especially as the songwriter part of me. But this is just, you know, just the way it sounded or the way you read it.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's such a carefully argued poem. If that makes any sense. What I mean is that, like, it's coming from this place of just starting with this description of, you know, the notes in the poem that push you to understand that ending are very small. You know, it's the description of, it's really cold and my father's making a fire. And then at the end, this realization of, he was working because he loved me. Right. He wanted to care for us.
And that's how he showed his care.
And
right.
I didn't understand it. I didn't have the ability to recognize my father's love.
Wow. Okay. So, yeah. I think that's why you read it very endearingly is kind of the way I felt you read it. It was a warmth to it. So obviously it means a lot to you.
That one line, fearing the chronic angers of that house.
Yeah, that's the part that stood out. Funny enough.
It puts you know, one of the poets that, there's a poet who I talk to sometimes, and she says, you know, every poem has a secret. It has something it's not going to tell you. And I feel like that line there is sort of pointing at, there's a deeper reality here.
Yeah. It made me think of ground and the foundation of which the house is built. For some reason, that's where my mind went when I heard the line, like the ground, the actual, what holds the house. But I also want to say that, interestingly, you've just said something that I'm going to share a little bit off topic, but not. So, and I have a good friend. You have a friend that talks about poetry. I have a friend that talks about songs. And so there's a part of me as a songwriter, I can write a commercial, something that would be considered commercial, mass appeal. And then I can write something that's a little bit more moody and a little bit more undercurrent. And I always like when I write a song, when I don't say what's really going on, that I sometimes hide underneath the lyric. I know what I'm saying, and I don't necessarily think about whether or not I want someone to understand it literally. And so I do sometimes metaphorically, or I do different things. And I have a friend that says, you know, what do you mean here? And I don't want to have to explain it. And I also feel like there's a certain secret that we all have when we write about what we're actually writing about, as opposed to just talking about it. So if you take a everyday occurrence, whether it's love, whether it's whatever it is, any kind of love, and then we write about it, is it not our prerogative as creative people to play with it as we will? And that's what makes a creative person write differently than saying, I went to the store, I picked up the bag, and then took the bag home. You know, I think it's an interesting way to look at words and to look at life's experiences a little bit more uniquely. So now I guess it's my turn to read my poem. And I have chosen a Gertrude Stein poem. The house was just twinkling in the moonlight by Gertrude Stein. And inside it, twinkling with delight, is my baby bright. Twinkling with delight in the house, twinkling with the moonlight. Bless my baby bright. Bless my baby twinkling with delight. In the house, twinkling in the moonlight. Her hubby dear loves to cheer when he thinks. And he always thinks when he knows, and he always knows that his blessed baby wifey is all here and is all hers and sticks to her like burrs. Blessed baby. That's interesting. It's almost like she's kind of, his blessed baby wifey is all here and he is all hers and sticks to her like birds. Blessed baby. Interesting poem, isn't it? I don't even know what it's about. You guys figured it out? William?
I mean, let me see. Well, I mean, obviously, I think it's a poem that's largely, I mean, if you know Gertrude Stein as a person, I mean, she was obviously very sort of proto-feminist or feminist. I don't know, in a certain way. She was a lesbian, I mean, very famously wrote about her lover, Alice B. Toklas.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think a lot of this poem, when I read it, I mean, there's a level at which, like, what's interesting to me is, what is the object? What is the baby? And what is her relationship to the baby? Because she's not the husband and she's not the wife.
Exactly.
I think it's about having sex.
I think the baby is her, you know what I'm saying?
Wait, the baby is what? Is her lover or her orgasm or?
No, is her lover's area.
Is her lover's.
Don't say it.
You think so? You think so? I don't see it like this.
I'm just saying.
Naive.
I see sticks to her like bird. Let me just
let me just read that again.
I mean, there are a lot of interesting little things in this poem. I mean, if we want to sit here and analyze it,
maybe a nickname for the part of the body that I'm insinuating.
Well, I mean, we're adults, Denise. We can use words.
Well, no, I just don't want to use the word vagina because
it's fine. I think it's fine.
Fine for you.
Both have one. It's fine.
I
think times have changed definitely, and now it's
we can put
socially accepted. But we could put
we can put a proviso at the top of the poem that, like, or at the top of the podcast that we're talking about poetry and we are not going to.
How is the name of the poem?
The house was just twinkling in the moonlight.
That's the name of the poem. I don't know.
Where did you find it?
I don't know. Hold on.
Yeah, that's the name. That's the name of the poem.
It is. The house. I found it on Poetry Foundation.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's in Gertrude Stein. Okay.
The title. This last one didn't say the title, but you have me singing the title. Yeah, I think it's about having sex with a woman. I think it's about her thing.
But why is she saying he? Why is she using the?
Back then, in those relationships, I think it was more like the male female, and I'm pretty sure Gertrude was the male.
Okay.
Her hubby dear loves to cheer when he thinks, and he always thinks when he knows he is her. So she's talking about herself. I always think, and when I know that this blessed baby wifey is all here. So her lover is all there. And he, which is her, and I, Gertrude Stein, is all hers and sticks to her like burrs. Blessed baby. That's hard for me, the sticks to her like burrs. That kind of makes me think it's about friction, But anyway, we're not going to get too into it. All we want to do right now is read the poetry because we only have another, bless you, 40 minutes. But you sneeze, it's the truth. I think I'm on the money with this poem.
I think
I'll tell you, I read it honestly as someone talking about having an affair with a married woman. The house was just twinkling in the moonlight. And inside it, twinkling with delight is my baby bright. So obviously the subject of the poem is someone in the house. There's a point when it's like, bless my baby bright, bless my baby twinkling with delight, in the house twinkling in the moonlight. Her hubby dear, loves to cheer when he thinks, and he always thinks when he knows, and he always knows that his blessed baby wifey is all here, and he is all hers. Not she's all his.
Yeah.
Wait a second. folks. At the bottom of this poem that I found, on the page that I found it, here are the notes. Okay? The house was twinkling in the moonlight. From Baby Precious Always Shines. Selected love notes between Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, St. Martin's Press.
Okay.
So Mama Marsa may be right about the birds, because of the three of us, I don't want to say it, I can relate.
No, I get it. I mean,
Yeah.
but like in the context of it being written in a context of this is a love poem between Gertrude Stein and Alice Toklas, changes that reading, obviously.
Let's move on. Who's next? Maggie.
Mine, and I'm gonna bring us to Emily Dickinson. I forgot about this poem. I really loved it, and in general, the poem is called "Hope is a Thing with Feathers."
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
Yes, and for me, why did I choose this poem is because for me, hope is a big thing. And in my own work, in my own work and in my relationships, and no matter when I talk with my friends, and I always try to bring up some hope. So like it's something that I really, really value. So the poem goes like this. Hope is a thing with feathers by Emily Dickinson. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that keeps so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. In her poem, Dickinson describes hope as a bird, which is being used as a metaphor for the idea of salvation.
And I
Birds
think
in Christian, yeah.
The bird is so sweet and wonderful that even a storm attacking it must be an upsetting. It must be the storm. She describes it, and sore must be the storm, right? So the storm itself must be sore.
right.
That
Angry.
could abash the little bird, that could attack it, that would, harm this bird.
I got it. Exactly. So that's why I was in the right place, but you're right. She's using it almost over cleverly or cleverly, whatever the word. Not over, because Emily's never over. William, where art thou, William? Where art thou?
Right here. What?
What you going to read next for us?
Oh, sure. Hold on. William Shakespeare, Sonnet 33. Full many a glorious morning have I seen flatter the mountain tops with sovereign eye, kissing with golden face the meadows green, gilding pale streams with heavenly alchemy. Anon, permit the basest clouds to ride with ugly rack on his celestial face, and from the forlorn world his visage hide, and stealing unseen to west with this disgrace. Even so, my sun one early morn did shine, with all triumphant splendor on my brow. But out, alack, he was but 1 hour mine. The region cloud hath masked him from me now. Yet him for this my love no whit disdaineth. Sons of the world may stain when heaven's sun staineth.
Do you like reading Shakespeare? I mean, let's face it. One thing I have to share, which I think you already know, you have the same first name, the two of you.
Oh, yeah, sure. I get that.
William Shakespeare.
I have a complicated relationship with Shakespeare, to be honest.
I know how you read them, by the way. I knew. So let's talk about it.
Well, I mean, there's a level at which Shakespeare, it is very hard to know how much of Shakespeare's brilliance as we experience it is something that existed in the work before he became Shakespeare to us. So much of our concept of poetry and our, notions around the sonnet in particular, for example, and even, when you get into theatrical writing and drama, there's a very, very deep level at which, Shakespeare is kind of inescapable force that, has been around for a very long time. And the question is, how much of that is a result of Shakespeare being brilliant, and how much of that is the result of our decision to canonize Shakespeare the way we did?
Exactly. Yeah.
It makes it hard for me reading it. I mean, I also have to point out there are a lot of writers who I've read who, like, not just poets, but writers like Tolstoy and J.R.R. Tolkien did not like Shakespeare overtly.
They didn't?
No. Tolstoy was like, he's a hack. His plays are no good. They're boring and badly written. Essentially, that he had a very complex argument. I'm boiling it down to like him just, and Tolkien, I think his issues were largely about, like, Tolkien had more specific issues with that I can't remember the exact nature of them offhand, but there have been a lot of famous writers who have sort of questioned Shakespeare's canonicity, or at least the nature of canonicity.
Two things. One, do you think that they're questioning his work? First of all, I'd like to know when they questioned him. Did they question him in the midst of their highest peak as their alive success, or was it rivalry? Was it them talking as young writers? Because there's a lot of rivalry.
I think that in both cases, it was something that they said throughout their career. Like, Tolstoy wrote a very famous essay.
And I've heard as well many, critics saying that he, because we had also that newsletter about plagiarism, they did say that he used other people's work. I don't know how much of that is true, of course, but it has been argued that a lot of his work has not been his. Like, he had what we call today ghostwriters using other people's works, or at least that's what I've heard.
I know there's a famous movie. Well, first of all, that happened a lot back then. Amadeus, the play was about his rival, and then the rival stole from him in the end. And then, who knows what was going on, because the writing was the main key from communicating. That was how they communicated before that was art, big part of art. But I was going to say, we could do a podcast, famous writers on other famous writers. In other words, we could do a podcast.
I think it might be more interesting at some point to do a discussion about Shakespeare and his critics.
So now it's your turn, Meggie, for your final poem.
I can read my last poem, which is, it has been highly argued who was the first person writing that poem. I mean, they kind of, so the poem is called Immortality, Do Not Stand by My Grave and Weep. And initially this poem has been published in the Gypsy of December 1934 by Clare Harner. And then there are a lot of people using that poem, rewriting it. There are people who use that poem for songs and stuff like this. So, like, I'm going to read what is, considered the original one, but it's very highly, argued who was the first. And then there was a lot of interesting stuff going on. Probably William knows more about that poem than I do, because it's the first time I found it, but I really liked it.
It's awesome.
So,
I know. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Great choice.
Okay. So, Immortality, Do Not Stand by My Grave and Weep by Clare Harner. Do not stand by my grave and weep. I'm not there. I do not sleep. I'm the thousand winds that blow. I'm the diamond glints in snow. I'm the sunlight on ripened grain. I'm the gentle autumn rain. As you awake with morning's hush, I am on swift upflinging rush of quiet birds in circling flight. I am the transcending night. Do not stand by my grave and cry. I'm not there. I did not die.
Cool. It's a great poem.
See, to me, this poem, it feels like it feels very juvenile to me. Juvenile. First of all, the rhyme scheme is too strong. It doesn't, like, the fact that it's written with just a solid, like, A, B, B, C, C, like the kind of rhyme scheme that's doing.
And maybe it's interesting because maybe it was something that they taught in school, or maybe somehow it came about, it kind of reminds me of something that a priest would say in church in a way. It kind of has a little...
It's very clearly written as a poem, almost explicitly feels like the kind of thing that was written to be read at a funeral.
What I really love about it is that she doesn't say, "Oh, please do not stand by my grave." She says, "Do not stand by my grave and weep." She's like giving a bit of an order. So, it's almost like she's a teacher or a mother or someone.
Oh, I love I didn't think about the structure of it. I didn't think about the rhythm of it. I just read it and it just appealed to me because it was very easy for me to understand. And maybe for people who are, let's say, non-native, it's sometimes easier to get through, because for me to read Shakespeare, when you read it, I was like, oh, this would take me, hours of practice to understand, even some words, I don't even know how to pronounce some of the words. So for me to get to the rhythm, when you said this is the same rhythm, I was like, oh, wow, is it?
That's one of the things that's it's that craft of being able to use the rhythm and the meter in a way that isn't in your face.
Okay, so cool. So, hey, what a great chat on poetry. Well done. I think very interesting. I found it very stimulating. You guys, you liked it?
Loved it.
Yeah. I mean, cool. I like talking about poetry. It's a thing.
Yes, you do. And thanks to you, Will. And we talk about poetry much. I talk about poetry much more now. Thanks to you, Will. Thank you. And thanks, Maggie. Okay, till next time.
This is William May saying goodbye. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with your friends. If not, please share it with your enemies.
Argh, Not Another Podcast About Book Publishing, is produced by Denise Marsa, Meggie Dimitrova, and William May. Please visit WilliamMayWrites.com for social media links, recited poems, and more.